China, how are they even stable now? I mean, look, the obvious answer is there's a lot of repression and the CCP is a very strong centralized authority. They must spend for stability. They must spend a lot of money.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's look at the outside and then work towards the inside. So on the outside, they can still access global energy. They can still access global food. They can still access global food inputs. As long as that is going on, people will be fed and the lights will be on. Now, they are utterly incapable of influencing those events. So when they break, there's nothing the Chinese can do about it. And we're probably going to see in the next few months significant energy failures out of the Russian space where the Chinese are going to bear the disproportionate burden of that. So we don't have to wait too long for the external environment to look nasty. Internally, when you've got this heterogeneous system, the two things you do are, number one, you beat the crap out of anyone who steps out of line. And so it's a national security state in every way you can imagine it. You basically pay everyone to be on the same side. So, we bitch in the United States about the Federal Reserve and QE and devaluing the dollar and printing currency and debt spending and all that. Yeah. That's a relevant conversation to have. The Chinese do it about an order of magnitude more than we do.
Wow.
If you're a gold bug, everything you believe about the United States, it's much more true for the People's Republic. Now, they do not have an internationalized financial system, so this all stays bottled up. One of the reasons why whenever the Chinese do try to liberalize their account so they can be a global currency, or whatever the spasm of the day happens to be, $1 trillion floods out in a matter of months as people try to get their money to some place where it'll hold its value. But it doesn't take much to pop that, because basically we're looking at subprime, the American subprime experience, but not just across the entire housing sector, but in every economic sector. And the subsector of China where this hyper-financialization is most exposed is agriculture. So they're going to get hit from labor, from finance, and raw material supply all at the same time.
Oh, man.
That's going to kill 500 million people. There's a number of ways this is going to break down. The history of maritime transport is very rich with examples of security threats. So, you've got pirates. You've got state pirates, or basically, people using their navy to do stuff. And then you've got privateering, which are private entities that have kind of a state charter in terms of having a place to fuel and sell their booty. But let's focus on insurance. You can't sail anywhere. You can't leave port without an insurance policy. And at the moment, an insurance policy costs about 1% the value of the ship itself to be paid out in installments over a 12-month period. So 1% is the total.
Oh, wow. Millions of dollars.
Yeah, but it's only 1%.
Yeah.
Now, that assumes that no one is shooting at anyone anywhere. If you sail into an area where there is a conflict, the cost of that policy increases by a factor of 100 to be paid weekly. That assumes that no one is shooting at civilian shipping.
Right, that's just accidental. You might hit a mine kind of stuff. If people are going after the ships.
Yeah, you're in a bad neighborhood, so we're going to charge you more.
Right.
But if someone starts shooting at a civilian vessel, you cannot get an insurance policy at all. So the Europeans have set up an environment with this price cap where a lot of countries in Northern Europe now have a financial and security reason to go after Russian shipping. I would argue that the more China acts like a bag of dicks, the more countries in Southeast Asia are developing an interest in going after that shipping. Mm-hmm. And while I don't think the Chinese are going to ever go after Taiwan, I think it would be national suicide. We are in an environment where that is plausible. And I can totally see the U.S. Navy, the guarantor of global maritime shipping, stopping the oil flows from the Persian Gulf to the Chinese coast. It doesn't have to happen everywhere. The whole world doesn't have to be a no-sail zone. You just need it to happen in a handful of environments to raise the cost of shipping to a point that most manufacturing no longer makes sense. Because remember, if you've got a 1,000-step supply chain, transport has to be no more than 2 or 3% of the cost of the entire thing. So shipping from step to step to step to step has to be cheap, has to be quick, has to be reliable, has to be safe. If you change that, if you just increase the cost of shipping by double, you've already eliminated over half of the global manufacturing viability. you don't have to move the needle very far to get there.
Is that a coincidence, or does having large amounts of commodities in your area just cause governments to focus on extraction to the detriment of literally everything else in their nation and society?
Well, it depends upon what else you have. So if you look at the Middle East, you're talking about an area where their biggest industries were pearling, frankincense, and fishing. And in desert communities, pre-industrial, you're talking about very small numbers of people. And then you stick a straw in the desert and you get oil, and obviously you're going to focus on that. So you get the Dutch disease, if you will. In comparison, Norway was an advanced technocratic society with basic manufacturing and hydropower and nickel processing before they discovered oil. Or look at Texas. If it had been an independent country, it would have been $1 trillion economy before the shale revolution. So when you have crude, it doesn't necessarily make you a failed state. It depends on what was there before.
What about getting Venezuela back online? I know Biden was trying to do that. I mean, I have concerns. I assume you do as well.
Well, let's start with what Biden was doing. He was basically saying that Venezuela, the state, owes a lot of entities in the United States, not just in the petroleum sector, a lot of entities, a lot of money. So we will loosen the sanctions a little bit so that the crude that you produce can be sold and you never see that money.
Okay.
That money goes to the American firms that you owe money to. And if you can keep this up and not be a jerk about it, then a year from now, when you've paid off those debts, we will then begin a more serious conversation about the broader environment. So it's an if-then. Do I think that Maduro is a great governor? No. Do I think he's the kind of person that should be allowed to be in control of Venezuela for the long run? Not really. I would argue that maybe we're not the people to make that decision. That should be the Venezuelans. Mm-hmm. But we're setting the stage for theoretically what comes next. And if Maduro decides to go back to his old habits, then this dissolves in a day and it's no harm to us. Or I mean, if it stops tomorrow, we're not in any worse place than we were the day before. If your goal is to actually get Venezuela back to its peak of producing 3 to 5 million barrels a day, that's a different conversation. Because we have had full-on state collapse complete with famine across the Venezuelan space. And this isn't Saudi Arabia where it's an easy field close to the coast. You've got a line of coastal mountains, then you've got your population belt, and your oil's below that. So if you want to resurrect Venezuela, you need to send in at least 50,000 troops and physically rebuild the country from the ground up over the course of a decade. And then you have the option of spending $200 to $300 billion to resurrect the world's most complicated oil production system. And if you start today, you will not get your first oil most likely until at least 2035. Well, it's not something we are interested in.
Yeah.
But if you fast forward a year or two, and the Middle East is being the Middle East again, and the Russian oil is gone, and the Americans have basically built a little wall around their own energy markets, then you're going to have global energy prices that on a cheap day are looking like 150 and are typically over $200
per barrel.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in that sort of environment, the Europeans are like, hey, Washington, would you mind if we colonized Venezuela? What sort of deal can we strike that you'll just let that happen?
And you say colonize, but it's not really a joke, because it's almost like that's what has to happen. Countries with large oil markets.
I mean, that's the scale of what has to happen here. And keep in mind that this is not the 1800s when the Europeans had the gun and everyone else had spears.
Yeah.
Hugo Chavez, one of his last big acts before he died, is he distributed 150,000 AK-47s to the population. So anyone who thinks that this is going to be easy is wrong in every possible way.